In 1991, a group of normal divers found something that didn't make sense. A submarine taking a break somewhere it shouldn't be. Over the next few years, they found things that changed history and brought up scary new problems. If you want to know what salvaging divers found inside the sunk Nazi Germany submarine, you have to go find it yourself. This is the real story of U-869, and it all starts with a secret at the bottom of the ocean, the ghost submarine of World War II. In the dark, rough Atlantic during the war, death could come from below at any time. It was quiet and hard to see, but German U-boats swam beneath the waves like sharks, sinking thousands of Allied ships with cold accuracy. They were Hitler's most terrifying tool at sea, cutting off important supply lines and leaving a path of oil and steel behind. The Nazis fired hundreds of U-boats during the war, but most of them sank. Some were caught, and others were never seen again. And U-869 was the most strange of them all. U-869 was a Type 9 C-40 U-boat that was launched in 1943. It was one of the largest long-range submarines that the Marines had ever built. It was almost 250 feet long and had 6 torpedo tubes. It was meant to cross the Atlantic and attack enemy ships deep in seas controlled by the Allies. Its job is to mess up, destroy, and disappear. Anchored at U-869 was Captain Helmut Neuerberg, a seasoned Navy officer. As the war turned against Germany in late 1944, U-869 was sent on its first combat cruise. War records say the plan was to go to the area around Gibraltar, which was a vital choke point where Allied ships had to go through the Mediterranean. But by that time, the German command system was a mess. There were misunderstandings, orders that didn't match up, and the chain of command was falling apart. It's possible that U-869's mission changed while it was en route. A U.S. warship and a Coast Guard cutter attacked and sank a German U-boat that they did not know the name of near Gibraltar on February 11, 1945. The government report said it was a proven killing. The Allies thought that the submarine that was sunk that day was U-869 based on timing and predicted U-boat motions. The Marine, who was hurt and broken, didn't say anything that wasn't true. That was the end of the story. All 56 people on board. U-869 were thought to have died when it sank off the coast of Gibraltar. No witnesses, no calls for help, and no sign of life. People didn't question this version of events for decades. It was just one line in the huge, bloody book of World War II. One more enemy submarine that never came back. But the story starts to fall apart when you look more closely. First, there were no confirmed photos or sonar pictures of a wreck near Gibraltar that matched U-869's size or shape. Reports from wartime were typically unreliable because they were often based on guesses made under the stress of battle or visual confirmation. It was easy to make mistakes because the Atlantic was so big and technology was so old. Second, German records from that time never made it clear where U-869 ended up. Hitler's war machine was breaking down by 1945. Talk on the radio stopped. Records were lost or not fully completed. The few logs that were found were often not clear. Some experts now think that U-869 might not have even made it to the Strait of Gibraltar. Another scary thing was that there was no radio noise. During missions, German U-boat had to report in order to get new orders and find out how their work was going. U-869 was last seen or heard from while it was still in the North Atlantic, a long way from where it was thought to have crashed. Nothing after that. Silence, like the ocean had taken it all in. Researchers and academics found more questions the more they dug. Is the submarine that was lost in the fight off of Gibraltar the wrong one? Was it sent somewhere else without anyone knowing? Or was there something much stranger going on? U-869 stayed a mystery for more than 40 years. Ghost ship lost in time, with memories and stories that don't match up. The crew's families didn't have a grave to visit or wrecks to mourn. All they had was a name on a memorial and a wartime file that didn't quite make sense. No one could agree, not even the experts. Military writers said that the case was over because of the attack on Gibraltar. People who dive, look for wrecks, and play detective weren't so sure, though. Long after that, something strange was seen on radar off the coast of New Jersey. Quickly, salvage divers checked, and what they found will blow your mind. The mystery of Jersey. There are a lot of dead steel ships in the North Atlantic off the coast of New Jersey. There are hundreds of wrecks under the water caused by storms, crashes, and wars. It's both a playground and a puzzle for dives in the area. But in the summer of 1991, wreck divers found something that was very different from anything else they had ever seen. John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and a small group of expert Northeast divers were using side-scan sonar to look for wrecks that no one knew about at the time. People knew that the water near the coast was very dangerous. Not much to see. Strong currents and deep dives. These were not just random descents. Technical diving and high-risk research like this required careful planning, nerves of steel, and a lot of planning. At a depth of 230 feet, about 60 miles off the coast of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, their radar picked up a picture. The thing that was lying on the ocean floor was long and thin, like a rocket. Something new and something old. What, though? The interest turned into a passion. When they did their first dive on the wreck, they could only see a few feet ahead of them. It was cold enough to cut through their clothes. The building was partly buried in sand and was twisted with fishing nets that had been there for decades. A few passes around it proved what was already clear. That thing was a submarine. A big one, and it shouldn't have been there. At first, they couldn't see any numbers or marks on the holes. There was no nameplate, sign, flag, or anything else that would have told you what kind of ship this was. The building was badly damaged. Its outer hull cracked and its conning tower fell in half. It was slowly rusting away to nothing. Did it sound American, Russian, or German? No one knew. It was then that the divers gave it a name. Hey, buddy, Yo-Hoo was a puzzle that made you think. It was known that no submarine from World War II had been lost anywhere near this spot. Even so, it had been lying still under the water for almost 50 years. The dive team began a number of trips to go back. These dives did not happen quickly. They needed special gas mixes, careful relaxation stops, and a lot of planning ahead of time. There were huge risks. The worst thing that could happen to divers is getting the bends or nitrogen narcosis. But each dive gave them new information. They found German gauges marked in metric units, pipes, valves, and instruments inside the wreck. It was clear that it was a German U-boat. Which one, though? They got back small things like plates, bowls, and pieces of tools. There were some that were marked with the Marine Eagle, but nothing clear. The turning point came when they found a butter knife that was dirty but still in good shape. It had the name Hornberg carved on it. Not a model number, but a man's name. Everything changed. The divers used military records and crew lists to find a real person with that name. Georg Hornberg, a crew member who served on U-869, is mentioned. The divers kept looking for things in the storage and under the water. They found valve stems and diesel engine parts with serial numbers on a later dive. They found these numbers in records from the German company Desimog AG Weiser, which made U-869, which builds ships. The pieces went together. It was done. It was impossible for these citizen divers to find the mystery wreck, but they did. The U.S. Navy finally admitted in 1997, 6 years after the first dive, that the wreckage off the coast of New Jersey was, in fact, U-869. The consequences were huge. U.S. military papers from 1945 to now said that U-869 had sunk near Gibraltar. But this was not true. It had died off the east coast of the United States, 3,000 meters away from where history had put it. The divers did something that had never been done before in military records. They had found and identified the wreck physically. They knew what was true. Then there was the creepy discovery. This is not where U-869 was being looked for. If not for a few crazy dives, it would still be rusting away in the dark, never telling its story. History buffs and the U.S. Navy paid attention. Wreck dives from all over the world said it was one of the best identifications ever made underwater without help from an official organization. There was no military or government there, just a group of leisure divers, a lot of drive, and hundreds of hours of dangerous work on the ocean floor. However, the puzzle wasn't fully solved. There was still the big question: how did UH-69 get here? It has task orders, Jalter said. Reports from the war put it in Europe. How did it get to the wrong side of the Atlantic? Was the path changed? Did it get new, secret orders? Or did they not communicate well, which led to it going rogue? There are no records left to answer that question. Not all of the marine logs were filled out, and all of the men on UH-69 had died with the submarine. Someone had found a grave. History seemed to be right. It was still not clear what UH-69 was, though. Death by enemy fire or something worse. When salvage divers proved beyond a question that the wreck off the coast of New Jersey was a German U-boat, UH-69, a new mystery came to light. What made it sink? It looked like a simple question. But as divers looked into the wreck and historians looked into it again, the answers became less clear. Each theory was backed up by evidence, but there were gaps in the evidence that made it feel like the truth was just out of reach. These are the two most common theories, and people still argue about them. 1. UH-69 was wiped out by its own weapon. 2. It was sunk by U.S. forces during battle. First, let's do the first. During World War II, German bombs were strong, but they weren't perfect. The Circle Runner, a scary failure, was one of their many problems. If the gyroscope or control surface on a torpedo that is supposed to go straight breaks, it will curve into a wide circle and then loop back toward the submarine that fired it. As a result, they killed themselves. This wasn't just an idea. During the war, it happened more than once, and every U-boat leader knew the risk. People who believe in the Circle Runner idea think this is what killed UH-69. They say that after shooting a torpedo, probably in battle or as a test, the weapon went off course and then came back around. It hit the side of their own sub before. The crew could do anything. This is supported by a lot of different pieces of data. To begin, there were no signs that UH-69 had ever fought an enemy ship. There were no reports of torpedo attacks and no records of an attack attempt that were still around. Second, the wreck has a lot of damage inside that looks like it was caused by a torpedo going off close to or against the ship, not by a direct hit from the outside. Okay, the UH-69 may have sunk on its own, but that doesn't mean the idea is true. The USS Howard D. Crowe and the USS Coiner were said to have found and sunk UH-69 in another report. This story says that on February 11, 1945, the two ships may have heard or seen a submarine in the area using sonar or hydrophones. Together, they started a depth charge attack. It was said that this battle sank an unknown U-boat, which was later thought to be UH-69, successfully after the war. Official U.S. Navy records have long said that this was the submarine's end fate. Even after the sub's wreckage was found off the coast of New Jersey, the Navy insisted that their depth charges were still to blame. This answer seems clear at first glance, but it brings up a lot of tough questions. To begin, the time. It wasn't thought that UH-69 would be close to the East Coast. It was told to go to Gibraltar for its task. Who knew about the link between that attack on a sub by Navy ships and UH-69 sooner? Second, the site of the wreck itself. The exact coordinates given by the USS Howard D. do not match the spot of the UH-69 wreck, a Crowe and the USS Coiner. It's almost right, but not quite. Not too close to raise a question, but far enough to make you wonder. The third step is sonar scans and damage estimates. Divers who looked into the wreck found that some of the torpedo tubes were still closed. What happened to UH-69? Why didn't it fire any or all of its weapons? What made it look like it was caught off guard? The signs gave divers a mixed picture as they spent more time inside the sunk U-boat. A lot of damage was done to the front of the submarine. It was crushed inward and bent by force. Some of the sections inside were blown apart, which suggests a shock wave from inside and not an explosion from a depth charge nearby. On the other hand, some parts of the hull's outside show deformation, patterns that could be caused by pressure waves from a depth charge. However, these marks are not as bad as they would be if the ship had been hit directly from above. One thing that stood out: the control room and the torpedo room were mostly still there. The damage was bad, but it was contained. This suggests a small blast inside the ship, possibly from a torpedo that went off while still in the tube or soon after launch. It was even more confusing because of where the crew was sitting inside. Skeletal remains found over time showed that no one made it to the escape doors. No one tried to come to the top. There were no signs of a rescue climb. It happened quickly and violently with no notice. No matter what hit U-869, from inside or outside, the team had no time to react. Even more mysterious is the fact that military records from the time don't match up. For a long time, people thought U-869 was nowhere near the U.S. coast, and the submarine that was said to have been sunk by U.S. destroyers was never for sure named. This makes it possible for both sides to be wrongly identified. It's possible that the USS Howard Drow and USS Coiner sank a U-boat, but not U-969. Maybe U-869 was already gone. A bad bomb may have killed it days before. Or maybe, just maybe, neither idea is true. So it's also possible that U-869 was sent on a secret mission with R-rooted orders that were never kept on file. In that case, the strange position and lack of radioactivity would make sense. It could also explain why the wreck was found in secret, even years after it was found. The answer became less and less clear as more information came in. Both ideas made sense, but they were both flawed. The death of U-869 was still an open case. The divers couldn't get over the fact that the torpedo tubes were still closed. Why hadn't the sub shot if it had been fighting? Where is the launch record if it was sunk by a circle runner? How could it have been caught with its guns not being used if it was ambushed? Things are even more sad when you think about the fact that U-869 was destroyed before it fired a single shot. It went over 1,000 miles. They tried to hide and die in quiet, not even being able to fire back. It also gives more weight to one last disturbing thought. Why did it come out of the water near the U.S. coast? No one could answer that question, but in the strangest way, someone would finally help. When they thought the story couldn't get any stranger, they opened a compartment that had been sealed. The secret rooms. Divers had been exploring the wreck of the U-869 for years, but they were always aware of the same risks and limits. Down there, the depth, the current, and the lack of sight all worked against them. But in late 2024, with better dive planning and newer tools, a part of the submarine that had been thought to be inaccessible for a long time was finally reached. Believe us when we say that what salvaging divers found inside the sunk Nazi submarine will leave you speechless. Pressure and time had almost completely blocked off the space, though it had collapsed in some places. Anonymized members of the dive team said that this area had probably not been touched since 1945, when U-869 hit the ocean floor. They found what one diver called a perfectly preserved time capsule inside. There were locked storage crates, foot lockers, and personal lockers in the compartment. Some of the lockers were still whole, with rubber seals that were just barely hanging on. The usual signs of life on a Nazi submarine were found among the things that were found: tins for food, logbooks, and clothes. Then they found something much stranger. Things that both historians and security officials knew right away were important. Sources involved with the investigation said that an Agrigine officer's ceremonial dagger was found. People say that a motto used by elite naval teams is etched into its blade. Next to it, folded up in a waterproof box, was an old Marine dress, uniform that still had the Iron Eagle emblem and a red collar with a swastika on it. It was in better shape than anyone thought possible. But what happened next shocked even the most experienced experts. It was buried under layers of sealed papers wrapped in oilcloth. Inside the box was Nazi memorabilia, such as a perfectly folded swastika flag. It was accompanied by English-language propaganda leaflets meant to make Americans angry, as well as what looked like a partly encrypted code book with markings from the ABV, which was Nazi Germany's military intelligence service. The find was so shocking and could have caused trouble politically that it was never made public. The reason for the secret was that U-869 might not have been just patrolling the Atlantic. It could have been sent to put agents or supplies on U.S. land. The idea hasn't been proven yet, but what it means is very scary. We thought we knew a lot about how the Germans worked in the Western Hemisphere until a Nazi submarine landed near the coast of the United States without being seen. This could happen at any time during the war. One more thing, though. Guilt for living. There were 56 men on U-869, and they were all thought to have died when the submarine sank in early 1945. But there was one name that wasn't on the final list of casualties, a man who wasn't on board during the planned time. He was known as Herbert Gashowski. Herbert was originally supposed to be a crew member on U-869 while it was getting ready for launch, but he got sick before the submarine left, so he had to be taken off the mission. He was replaced by another sailor. U-869 left port without him. This change seemed like a small, normal staffing issue at the time, but that one job change would have a huge impact on the rest of his life. For decades, Gashowski, military scholars, and the families of the dead all thought that U-869 had been lost near Gibraltar and was most likely sunk by Allied depth charges. That was the official account that the German Navy and historians after the war agreed on. Then, in the 1990s, American wreck divers searching the water near Point Pleasant, New Jersey, found the wreckage of a submarine that had sunk. As part of their study, the divers started getting in touch with family members of the original crew who were still alive. They were able to find Herbert living in Germany, many years after the war, but still remembering the people he had trained with. Him. Diver and historian Richie Kohler says Herbert was doubtful at first when he was told that U-869 had been found not off the coast of Spain, but off the eastern coast of the United States. The news went against everything he had been told and everything he had believed for more than 50 years, but the proof could not be argued with. The divers showed pictures of things they had found in the wreckage, such as personal items, technical parts, and even a knife with the name of a crew member Herbert knew, Georg Horenberg, carved on it. Richie and fellow diver John Chatterton talked about their talks with Herbert. Chatterton and Kersonen later wrote the book Shadow Divers together. He confirmed that the Horenberg we knew from the knife's etching had, in fact, served on U-869. He also remembered how the company trained in the atmosphere in the last few weeks before the boat left. Because he was sick, he couldn't sail with the group. The event wasn't very exciting. There was no last-minute decision or order override. It was just a matter of medical fitness. He had been swapped out, and the submarine left without him. Herbert was said to be moved but calm when asked how he felt about the find. He thanked the strange luck that had kept him alive and said he was sorry for the deaths of his old friends. He didn't want attention. But he did write and talk to the divers and writers who worked on the U-869 story. He didn't do long interviews. His memories helped confirm crew members' names and backed up historical records from the German side, giving us important information about the final crew makeup of the sub. Herbert passed away in 2005, so he never learned about the locked room. He might have known about it, but didn't want to say anything. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.